In the last section, we started talking about how we're going to develop a development workflow that's going to allow us to develop our application, test it in some fashion, deploy it, and then repeat that process all over again. So in this section, we're going to start talking about some more specifics around that flow. Now, I'm going to give you a diagram here that's going to be just a little bit interactive. So I'm going to add in a couple of elements as we go through this description over time. The important thing to keep in mind here around this diagram is that we're not going to talk too much about Docker's flow in this just yet. Instead, I'm going to focus on telling you about some outside services and outside technologies that we're going to use to set up this development workflow. Once we kind of understand the core principles or the kind of design behind this development workflow, we'll then kind of introduce Docker and talk about how Docker kind of facilitates everything. Okay, so let's get to it. Our development workflow is going to revolve around creating a GitHub repository. This GitHub repository is going to kind of serve as the central point of coordination for all the code that you and I are going to write, and then eventually deploy to outside hosting service. Our GitHub repository is going to have two different branches. One branch we're going to call the feature branch. This feature branch is essentially a development branch of sorts. This is a branch that you and I are going to add code to, make changes, or do whatever it is we need to do to update our application. We're also going to have a master branch. A master branch, it belongs to traditionally every Git repository that you might make. Our master branch is going to kind of represent our very clean working copy of our code base. Any changes that we make to this master branch right here are going to be eventually automatically deployed out to our hosting provider. Let's now draw on a couple arrows here to kind of walk through the process through which you and I are going to make changes to our code base and then eventually deploy those. So everything is going to start off with you and I on some local development machine, like your desktop or your laptop. You and I are going to pull all the latest code that we have from our feature branch. And so we're going to imagine that maybe you are working on this project with some other engineer, and maybe they have already published some amount of code on this feature branch. So you're going to pull down that code base, and then on your laptop, you are going to make some amount of changes to the application. After you've made those changes, you'll then push those changes back up to the GitHub repository, again to the feature branch. You are never going to push code directly to master. You're only going to pull and push code from the feature branch. Once you push your changes up to this feature branch, you'll then create what is called a pull request. So we're going to make a pull request to take all the changes or all the new features that you've added to this feature branch right here and merge them over to the master branch. So this kind of merging of code from feature over to master is done by what we call that pull request. Now this pull request right here, or this request to add some code from feature over to master, is going to set off a series of actions that are going to kind of govern how you manage your code base. So once you create this pull request right here, and then eventually merge it into master, two very important things are going to occur. First off, when you make this little pull request, we're going to set up a workflow that is going to automatically take our application and push it over to a service called Travis CI. Travis CI is a continuous integration provider. And essentially what they do is pull down your code and run a set of tests that you write on your code base. These are tests that you are going to write yourself. Now, for your particular application or wherever you go and use this flow, you'll end up using tests relevant to your particular application or whatever language you're working with. For our application, the one that we're going to kind of test this flow out on, we're going to just be making use of a couple of pre-generated tests, so we don't need to worry too much about the testing for right now. Assuming that Travis CI is able to pull all the code from our master branch and run tests on it successfully, Travis CI is then going to be set up to automatically take our code base, take our entire project, and push it over to some Amazon Web Services hosting. So essentially this entire flow is going to be depending upon you pushing some code up to this feature branch, creating the pull request, merging the pull request with the master branch, and the instant you do that, we run our tests. If the tests run successfully, Travis CI will automatically deploy your application to AWS. So that is the flow in a nutshell. Now this flow is a little bit complicated, so I want to talk about the entire flow again, like from start to finish, one more time in a slightly different format, just kind of a different diagram here, just to give you kind of a different take on what's going on. If you feel like you already understand this flow, that's totally fine. Take a pause right here and skip over to the next video. Otherwise, I'm going to give you essentially the same description again, but with a different set of diagrams. All right, so we can kind of imagine that we're going to have 3 phases to our project here. We've got the dev phase, the testing phase, and the production phase. During the dev phase, you and I are going to make some number of changes to our code base. And again, these are all going to be made to a branch that is not the master branch. We're going to call it our feature branch because it's where we develop new features. Once we make our changes to that feature branch, we're then going to push our changes to GitHub, and then we're going to create a pull request to merge with the master branch. As soon as we make that pull request, we are going to set up Travis CI to automatically pull that master branch with the new and updated code. Travis CI is then going to run our tests. If all the tests are executed successfully, we're going to say, great, we can merge all the changes over to the master branch. We're going to again push our code over to Travis CI. We're going to run the test one more time, and then have Travis CI automatically deploy our application over to AWS services, or essentially a very specific service that is called Elastic Beanstalk. Okay, so that's kind of the whole flow that we're going to go through here in 2 different diagrams. Let's take a quick pause right here. We're going to come back to the next section and start talking about how Docker fits into all this stuff.